Water permeates all we see around us, plants, trees, the soil, you and me. Every living thing needs water. Without this vital liquid, we literally become the dust of the ground. Have you ever thought what life might be like without a sufficient supply of fresh water? There are a number of places in the world where this is becoming a reality. From California to North Africa and the Middle East, more and more, it seems, water is becoming a cause of conflict. Stay with us on The World Tomorrow as we look at water, the gift of life.
This week on The World Tomorrow, David Hume.
Thank you for joining us. How many times have you heard that without water, none of us would last more than a few days? Yet millions around the world don't have safe or ample drinking water. But the Earth has plenty of water. In fact, it has the same water supply it's always had. But it's not always available where it's needed most. With increasing world population, industrialization, and urbanization, the next 10 years may turn out to be the decade of water wars. This week, we look at the growing worldwide water crisis with special emphasis on the Middle East. We'll see there are lessons for all of us to learn no matter where we live, and we'll give a biblical perspective. In Egypt recently, we covered the first annual Global Water Policy and Technology Summit. That's where our analysis begins. Hosted by the Foreign Ministry of Affairs of the Arab Republic of Egypt and the United States Global Security Council, the objective was to raise the awareness level of those in the political echelons to the seriousness of the world's water problems. The continent of Africa was specifically addressed at this first of 5 global water summits. Over 43 nations were represented along with official observers from Turkey, Jordan, and Iraq. Members from the World Bank, Organization of African Unity, plus various branches of the United Nations and other international agencies were also present. Dr. Joyce Starr is chairman of the Global Water Initiative.
I don't think people really appreciate the strategic and economic importance of water. In Africa, we know that as much as 40% of the population may be suffering from severe illness or even death related to Africa's water resources, contamination, scarcity. In the Middle East, it's very different. It's a question not so much of tens of thousands of people dying from disease, but water conflict.
Egypt is the gift of the Nile. So said the Greek historian Herodotus over 2,000 years ago. What he meant was that without this river, Egypt would have remained an empty desolation. As it is, only 3% of the land benefits from these waters. With a population of 54 million increasing at over 1 million a year, the decade ahead will present a major dilemma for Egypt. How to match the water resources of a rainless country with more and more open mouths. Looking specifically at Egypt, there are some unusual water problems. Several nations share the same resource. Dr. Boutros Ghali is Egyptian Minister of Foreign Affairs.
Yes, in the case of Egypt, the Nile, you have Egypt, the Sudan, Kenya, Tanzania, Uganda, Ethiopia, Burundi, Rwanda, and Zaire. And if you want to do any kind of common project, or if you want to have a master plan, you will need the cooperation of all those countries.
Getting such cooperation between nations is notoriously difficult. But the results of not getting that cooperation hardly bear thinking about, especially in the face of a population explosion.
Boutros Ghali said to me in 1984 that Egypt could be the next Bangladesh of the area, of the region. And he was referring to the Bangladesh of old, when we saw pictures on our televisions of tens and thousands of people dying.
And it's the same for many other countries. The nations of Africa and the Middle East are not the only ones threatened by population explosion and water scarcity. International organizations like the World Bank are wrestling with the problem.
The expected growth of the world population from about 5 billion today to at least 8 billion in the year 2025, under the most optimistic assumptions, in case we are effective in helping developing countries to reduce the growth. This is a tremendous increase. The major effect will be we'll have to resolve water resources conflict.
As the developing world becomes more industrialized and urbanized, more water will be needed in rapidly growing cities. Today, rural areas take about 80% of available water resources for agriculture. In the future, it'll have to be less. The issue will become how to produce more food for larger populations with less water. Between now and the year 2000, it's estimated that the cost of urban water will double, even in developed countries. The reason? Increasing demands for sewage treatment. Compounding the growing demand for drinkable water is the pollution of groundwater by urban and industrial activities. Outside the city, agricultural fertilizers and pesticides will no doubt continue to add to the pollution problem. It's very difficult to tell the third world to put the brakes on development. They're intent on following the example of the more wealthy nations. But their understandable desire to have what the first world has comes when they can least afford it, financially or in human terms. Overshadowing all of these concerns is the population explosion in the third world.
We haven't made a major incremental progress with respect to meeting the expanding population. This is a moral imperative, I think, that we respond to.
Alexander Roteval is a water specialist for the World Health Organization.
When you look at the fact, I think Joyce Starr quoted 29,000 children, infants dying every day. I think the figure is about 35,000. 35,000 means very little, but if you translate that into 24 hours a day, and into the number of Boeing 747s that would include a full load of children, then it becomes, I think it's about four Boeing 747s contents dropping out of the sky every hour. If you're a Christian, you could say there's certain biblical intonations to the issue. There's a certain aspect of morality, as far as I'm concerned.
As we've often seen from week to week on The World Tomorrow, in analyzing world problems, we come up against the morality issue. We're face to face again with the limitations placed on man by his own human nature.
Egypt today is taking the majority of the water of the Niles, the largest share, and the headwaters of the Blue Nile are controlled by Ethiopia. The relationship between Egypt and Ethiopia is not very good.
Since Egypt receives practically no rain, it's a very vulnerable country. That makes its neighbors suspicious of its intentions.
Lately, there's been a great deal of press that the Israelis are working with the Ethiopians to create a series of dams that will be a threat to Egypt's lifeline. The Ethiopians sent a high-level minister to Egypt to negate this rumor. The Israelis have done everything possible to negate this rumor, and I have on the best information from our own government that it's a complete falsehood, but it's been spread. The rumor has been spread because fear is so evident.
It's situations like these, resource scarcity compounded by fear and rumor, that make for sudden outbreaks of hostility. Of course, Israel has its own water problems to worry about. Will water become a more contentious issue in Israel's future?
Could go both ways. Best case scenario, to make the Middle East green. We have desert in Israel, desert in Egypt, desert all around. I think if we work together with the Arab countries in different projects, and we don't work against each other, then water could be conducive to economic cooperation. Second possibility, a fight over water. We had it before. 67 war, if you remember, was preceded by a struggle over water between us, Israel and Syria. There's not enough water for any of the countries involved, including Israel. And if it becomes a struggle between countries, and not only Israel and the Arabs, but also between Arab countries, or Turkey and Arab countries, it could lead to confrontation.
Confrontation over water, as Uriel Severe points out, has happened in the past and very well could happen again. For years on The World Tomorrow, we've targeted the Middle East as the most likely flashpoint for another world war. And we haven't been alone. Strategic thinkers, military experts, political commentators have all made similar statements. The events of recent months have only served to emphasize the critical importance of the region. World oil supplies were greatly threatened by Saddam Hussein's invasion of Kuwait. But Middle East water, not oil, could be a far more troublesome issue in international affairs. And if water is a crisis for the Middle East, it's a crisis for the world. It affects every one of us.
Water added to everything else, the maelstrom of issues that exist in the Middle East, and could perhaps water might be a touchstone, might be a spark.
The West Bank and Gaza Strip continue at the center of confrontation. When it comes to water supplies, some claim there's a marked disparity between what the Israelis take for themselves and what they allow for the Palestinians. And that seems like a time bomb.
It is a time bomb, and the first issue in a peace process to be negotiated between Israel and the Palestinians will be water. Now, Israel doesn't take the majority of water from the Palestinians. It's much more complicated than that. It is true that Israelis use more water than the Palestinians, but we tend to describe things in very broad general categories that really don't capture the true situation. Israel is not stealing all the Palestinian water, but on the other hand, it's not equitably shared.
We share the water with the Palestinian inhabitants. There are approximately 100,000 Israelis living in these territories. And we share it proportionately with the Palestinians. The Palestinians absolutely categorically do not have less water today than they had in '67. And they're not less water resources.
In the case of the Gaza Strip, Gaza's renewable water resources have basically been exploited. The exploitation of resources is an aspect of human nature. And the Gaza Strip is threatened not only by a critical water shortage, but also by a sanitation time bomb. If the Gaza Strip is out of water for all practical purposes, who will give Gaza water? What's the incentive for the Israelis to give Gaza water when there's such an undercurrent of political unrest between the two? The Gaza Strip could be helped by desalination technology, that's purifying seawater, but who will pay for it? The critical nature of water resources in the Middle East was underscored not so long ago when King Hussein said on Jordanian television that water was the only issue that could bring him to war against Israel. The problem is, of course, that both Israel and Jordan have a common water source, the Jordan River.
If you have less than 1 million cubic meter available per 1,000 people for all users, you are at a limit where it becomes serious. And when you have only half of that, which is the case of Jordan, Israel, for example, then the situation is very conflictual.
When political ideologies differ, when there are ethnic or tribal differences, and when emotions rule, it becomes an almost impossible situation.
There's no logic in the Middle East. Even when self-interest and survival is at stake, the fundamental roots of very deeply held differences rule instead of reason. I think we have to realize that in the Middle East especially, it's a very slow process of changing mindsets that go back not 10 years or 20 years, but in a sense thousands of years. Deeply emotional and historic mindsets. And no harms are forgotten on either side. So we have to be very sensitive and very patient.
The problems confronting today's Middle East spring from deep spiritual and emotional roots. Nearly 4,000 years of misperceptions, grudges, quarrels, and misunderstandings continue to fuel the current crisis. It's sometimes hard to believe that many of the peoples of the region have a shared heritage. Yet the Bible has much to say about their origins and about today's age-old conflict. That shouldn't surprise us. Arabs and Israelis alike recognize that their historical roots can be found in the Bible. Many peoples of the Middle East know they're descended from the various branches of Abraham's family. Because of his obedience to God, we're told Abraham, or in Arabic Ibrahim, would become the father of many tribes and peoples, some of whom would become the chief actors in the Mideast drama being played out in our day. Many of the Arab peoples are descended from Ishmael, or Ismail, Abraham's son by Hagar the Egyptian. The Jews come from Isaac, or Yitzhak, Abraham's son by his wife Sarah. These two sons were rivals from the beginning. The Bible describes how Abraham sent Ishmael and his mother away to maintain peace in the family. Today, nearly 4,000 years later, the various descendants of Abraham are still quarreling. Today's Mideast conflict is in effect a long-standing family quarrel. Attitudes and historical perspectives are often transmitted from generation to generation. Water has been a divisive factor in the Middle East from biblical times. Take the story of Abraham and the Philistine king Abimelech. The book of Genesis records an agreement reached between them over a supply of well water. When Abraham died, however, the agreement was broken, and the wells were filled with dirt. The book of Genesis describes what happened next. Isaac reopened the wells that had been dug in the time of his father Abraham, which the Philistines had stopped up after Abraham died, and he gave them the same names his father had given them. Isaac's servants dug in the valley and discovered a well of fresh water there. But the herdsmen of Gerar quarreled with Isaac's herdsmen and said, "The water is ours." So he named the well Esek, meaning dispute, because they disputed with him. Then they dug another well, but they quarreled over that one also. So he named it Sitnah, meaning opposition or hostility. So lack of cooperation over water has long been the case in the Middle East. That's not to say that many people haven't tried to solve the problem. For example, the current president of Turkey has proposed a peace pipeline to provide Middle Eastern countries with surplus waters from Turkey. But is this a realistic proposal?
I have to emphasize that President Özal of Turkey, who was prime minister when he conceived of this concept, is a visionary, and he understood that Turkey is abundantly endowed with water, that Turkey could share that water with the countries of the Middle East, that a pipeline, if we have oil pipelines, gas pipelines, we could have water pipelines. So the idea was very positive. The feasibility studies have been undertaken at a preliminary level, and I understand it can be done, but can it be financed, and will it be accepted? That's another question.
Yes, why not? I believe that we will need water, this region will need water, and any kind of joint project. Concerning the Middle East, you have one prerequisite. As long as you have no peace in the Middle East, it is impossible to do any kind of joint project, it means. And there will be no peace unless we can find a peaceful solution of the Palestinian problem.
Well, the question is it feasible? Why not? You know, technically speaking, a peace pipeline with one condition: it should include Israel. You cannot exclude Israel out of it. So I would say the problem is not the idea is good, the problem is the feasibility.
Today, human beings tend to look for technological fixes to their problems. That's a byproduct of the age we live in. And there are a number of technologies that could help aspects of the water crisis, whether it's contamination or scarcity. Methods of advanced water treatment can produce drinkable water from seawater by desalination. It's also possible to remove agrochemical pollutants from water so that it can be reused. Now, you'd think that such strategies would give hope for the future of our water supplies.
I am not optimistic. I am really very nervous about that the people do not pay attention to water problems.
Leon Auerbach is president of the International Desalination Association and manager of power and desalination for the Bechtel Corporation in Washington, D.C.
And we are very very much encouraging consideration, both on political, technical, management level, to pay attention to water problem. We can really develop the technology which can solve the problems, but it would take quite an effort on parts of governments, cooperation, to really achieve the level, technical level, as well as cost, simplicity of operation, reliability, that will be available not only to advanced developing country or rich country like Middle East, but really to continent like Africa.
Others have sought to resolve the problem of water scarcity by seeking out new sources from aquifers deep in the earth. Wes Skiles is an underground water explorer, diving to depths of 300 feet and following cave systems up to 1 mile in length. Wes's work is changing the way we view our underground water resources.
We're going very deep into the aquifer where people have never been, and that's where the water is. One of the things I think we have to look at is what's to keep surface waters from being overexploited? What's to keep groundwater from being overexploited? Traditionally, we've thought of groundwater as water stored in rock. And my work and the work of my colleagues shows that there's a lot more water stored in spaces, voids within fractures and stratigraphic separations and formations than we ever thought before. And that changes how we look at how water moves through the ground, how quickly it can move through the ground, and we know a lot more about the potential to contaminate these water supplies. Surface waters are already being mismanaged, mishandled. We're manipulating nature to a great deal. There is probably a fine line between utilization of surface water and groundwater, and where is that balance? Where do you strike the balance?
Where do you strike the balance? That's a question, again, that reflects on hard-to-control human nature, on morality, and on man's proclivity for overexploitation of resources.
That is true. Now human nature will play a very significant role in this, and in some cases that is uncontrollable because of the fact of the politics of the situation, the socioeconomic pressures and things that are beyond the control.
Boston University's Farouk El-Baz is a water specialist who uses satellite technology to seek out new sources of fresh water. But he's equally concerned about conservation.
We did not make the earth. We found the earth the way it is, and we should learn how to live with that environment. If the environment that we're living in is a forest area, we should figure out what makes that forest and how to utilize that forest resources and how to live with it and not ruin it the way we're doing.
Like the larger environmental crisis, the growing water crisis will not go away. It's just one more aspect of a bigger problem. Technology may help solve some of our problems, but as we've heard today, a more profound development needs to take place. We need a way to improve the human heart. No amount of technology will ever do that. Only a power outside of and superior to man can do it. Significantly, the book we've alluded to a number of times in this program, the Bible, also provides the way out of this dilemma of water resources, environmental degradation, conflict, and war. It speaks to a future God-initiated change in the human heart, and it's truly a prophetic statement. In the book of Ezekiel, God is quoted as saying, "I will give you a new heart and put a new spirit within you. I will take the heart of stone out of your flesh and give you a heart of flesh." Like water that flows freely and has no political boundaries, the spirit of goodwill and cooperation must cross religious and cultural barriers if there's to be peace in the Middle East or anywhere. A fundamental change in the human mind is the only way ahead, and that can only come with a new spirit that will change our mindsets. Now, the Bible predicts that that will happen. That new spirit is available now to those who really want it enough to pursue it. In the end, man will realize that it's the only answer. Now, if you'd like to know more about this important issue of the environment, why not request this informative free booklet, Planet Earth Beyond Repair? This well-researched booklet gives a comprehensive picture of what we're doing to our planet and what can be done to resolve it. The introduction, A Planet in Peril, speaks of our global environmental crisis. Today we live in what's called a global village. What one nation does affects all the others, whether it's polluting the rivers and oceans, cutting the tropical rainforests, or showering down acid rain. The first chapter includes articles on the greenhouse effect, ozone depletion, air pollution, and today's topic, our troubled waters. The next chapter, Pattern for Catastrophe, shows man's disastrous impact on the environment, beginning from the Industrial Revolution. And the last chapter, entitled Solving the Problem, shows what each of us can do to reverse these dangerous trends. This chapter concludes from the biblical perspective what is needed to ultimately stop the destruction of our world. You'll find all of this in Planet Earth Beyond Repair. Be sure to request your free copy. And if you're not already a subscriber, we'll also be sending you a free subscription to the Plain Truth magazine. It's published in 6 languages and read by millions worldwide. You can renew your subscription for as long as you'd like without any cost. The Plain Truth is a magazine of understanding that keeps you up to date with important world trends as well as social, family, and religious topics. It'll help you get a better understanding of the vital issues of our day from the biblical perspective. An example is this article, Seeing the World Through Islamic Eyes, which dispels many of the myths and misconceptions about this religion and gives deeper insight into Islam and its role in world events today. I'm sure you'll find it challenging reading. There's no other magazine like it, and there's absolutely no subscription price. It's yours free for as long as you'd like. So once again, be sure to request today's free literature, this booklet on Planet Earth Beyond Repair, and the Plain Truth magazine. All you need to do is send your request to The World Tomorrow, Pasadena, California, 91123. That's all the address you need. That's The World Tomorrow, Pasadena, California, 91123. In Canada, write to The World Tomorrow, Box 44, Station A, Vancouver, BC, V6C 2M2. Now, before we close, here's a preview of what's coming up next week on The World Tomorrow.
Many people believe deep beneath the Earth's surface there is an ever-burning hell where sinners are tormented eternally. A leading news magazine said most people believe in a hell, yet very few believe they themselves will ever go there. What does the Bible say? For a biblical discussion of this controversial subject, join me next week on our program, Is There a Real Hellfire?
We hope you'll watch us again next time. Thank you for joining us today. I'm David Hume for The World Tomorrow.
The preceding program was paid for by the Worldwide Church of God.